Welcome to Wandering Jews at J Squared Adventures. Travel far enough and you meet yourself. We're your hosts.
I'm Scott Copeland.
I'm Rivka Brahma. On Jerusalem's Givat Ram, Israel's Capitol Hill, the state gathered its defying institution into a single civic horizon. The Knesset, the Prime Minister's office, the Bank of Israel, the Israel Museum, and crowning the ridge, the Supreme Court. This hill is a physical articulation of Israel's democratic architecture and the values it aspires to uphold. The Supreme Court, rooted in Jerusalem stone, yet open to the future, reflects the depth of Jewish memory and the demands of a democratic society.
Designed by Ada Karmi Melamed and Ron Karmi, the building guides visitors through a symbolic procession that connects past, place, and future. For example, circle and square. The circle in the architecture represents justice. It's timeless, the idea of aspirations for the future. The square represents law, borders, human institutions, and accountability.
Another example, Jerusalem stone wall. A wall runs through the building, echoing the biblical command, Tzedek, Tzedek tirdof, justice, justice shall you pursue.
Light from above, reminding us of the biblical quote, a judge must be guided by what his or her eyes see. Skylights funnel daylight into the courtrooms, expressing the principle that justice must be transparent. It must be seen. The architectural choice, it embodies the fundamental Talmudic idea. A judge must be guided only by what his eyes see, in Bava Batra, signifying that justice cannot be abstract or hidden. It requires the judge to look directly at the reality of the people before them in the light of day, and the court looking back on and seeing the eyes of the judge.
It's clear that the Karmi duo, a brother and sister, thought about everything and symbolizes everything in the building has a symbol, and it's not there just for fun or just for looks. For example, the access to the Knesset, a physical and symbolic bridge. A deliberate line of sight connects the judicial and the lawmaking branches. The panoramic window. Inside the court, a large covered window looks southwards, framing the Knesset building as a constant visual presence within the halls of justice. The connection between law and lawmaking.
Nice. The idea that you mentioned of the access to the Knesset, that bridge, you also have through the Rose Garden itself, that connection from the outside the building, going through the park, walking towards the parliament. And, I guess, again, it's a bit of a romantic view, but you can almost imagine judges, lawyers, members of Knesset aides, etc., walking along that path, considering the discussion they were just in, the court case they were just looking at, and maybe also asking themselves, is justice being done?
Situated slightly higher than the Knesset is the court. Physically, it overlooks the government complex, symbolizing its role in observing and reviewing the actions of the state. This is in the center of many, many debates.
For sure, this idea of overlook, of supervision, of the role of watchdogs, and again, obviously a legitimate debate in every democracy about what is the appropriate balance between the various branches of government. In Israel in recent years, of course, this debate has become increasingly sharp and unfortunately increasingly, at least verbally, increasingly violent.
So let's talk about the role of Supreme Court in Israel.
So the Supreme Court, it's a little bit different than what we're used to from the United States. It sits both as the final appellate court, but it's also the high court of justice. Any individual, whether they're a citizen or not, can petition the courts and hence the government directly. If someone feels they've been wronged, the Supreme Court can act as their voice to try to answer whether or not there is justice in their claim.
Because unlike the states, which operates under a single written constitution, Israel does not have a constitution. Israel relies on a series of basic laws, Chukei Yesod we call it in Hebrew, that serves as its constitutional framework. There is no constitution, giving the court a unique role in interpreting and evolving legislation. Everything that has been written in these laws is kind of up for interpretation. And who decides on that? The Supreme Court. Judges are appointed by a committee, very different from the states. There's a distinct process in the U.S. Justices are nominated by the president, confirmed by the Senate, and then they serve for life. In Israel, justices are selected by a multi-sector judicial committee and must retire at the age of 70. Finally, Israel's Supreme Court functions as a dual capacity, both as a nation's highest appeal court and, through the High Court of Justice, Bagatz, as a court of first instance for petitions against the government. Like you said, if you feel you've been wronged, if you want to challenge a law, that's where you go, Bagatz.
And in that sense, the Supreme Court has played a crucial role in determining policy and also political norms in a relatively young, I'll say even fragile democracy, facing an ongoing and flammable security reality.
Let's take one example. In the 1998 ruling, Bagatz restricted techniques of interrogation by the Shin Bet, the Secret Service. In a unanimous decision, the court ruled that the state's security services lacked the legal authority to use physical means like shaking or sleep deprivation. This was huge. The court famously asserted that even in the face of terrorism, a democracy must define itself with clean hands, yadayim nekiyot, establishing that the rule of law must prevail even in the pursuit of security.
So if we mention the actual architects of the Supreme Court, it's important to also mention the person who in many ways has been the architect of the Israeli justice system, at least in the last number of decades. And that is Aaron Barak. Barak is the former president of the court. He himself is a survivor of the Kovna ghetto, and there is no doubt, and he marks this in his own autobiographical writing and in interviews, etc., that the experience of the Holocaust was central in shaping an understanding of the role of law centered on human dignity. And so, for example, the so-called constitutional revolution, Barak elevated the basic laws that Rivka had mentioned earlier that take the place of a constitution in Israel, specifically a basic law around human dignity and liberty, to a kind of quasi-constitutional status. This was really a landmark shift. Again, Israel even today does lack a formal unified constitution. By treating these basic laws as supreme or in lieu of a constitution, the court gained the authority to strike down regular laws that infringed upon fundamental liberties and hence exercised, and in some ways some argue, widened their authority as a supervisor, watchdog, overlooking the executive branch of government.
Right. This is definitely not a consensus. This is something that we're still dealing with today. What is the power of majority? If we voted for these people and they're making these laws, who is the Supreme Court to decide that this is illegal? And that is basically one of the cores of the debate that we see today. So the Rose Garden that we've mentioned before has been home to many protests and many debates from both sides. Aaron Barak is a loved figure, but also very controversial. Is everything judiciable? I don't know. I'm making up a word, but you guys get it, right? Hakol shafit, we would say in Hebrew.
Is everything judgeable? So
let's take another example, for instance, where the law and the Supreme Court changed things. Let's talk about the Buzaglo test. In 1977, Attorney General Barak faced immense pressure to grant Asher Yadlin, higher up in the Bank Israel Authority, a powerful establishment figure. He was under investigation for bribery. Barak famously refused to grant him, coining the phrase, Din Yadlin, Kedin Buzaglo. As for Yadlin, we will do the same for Buzaglo, asserting that the law for the elite must be identical to the law for the common citizen, Buzaglo. It's not by chance that Buzaglo was used as a surname. It's synonymous for a marginalized, Mizrahi, working class people. There wasn't a lot of Buzaglos in the treasury of the Israel Bank, for instance.
Mizrahi meaning Jews from Islamic
and
countries and Arab countries who came to Israel mainly in the period after the state was created.
So what Barak was saying We need to make sure that the law is just for all. Your surname, your background has nothing to do with the law. The law is blind to that. Therefore, he coined the Buzaglo test. It's a phrase that people use a lot, sometimes not even knowing where it came from.
And later on, it was tested once more when Yitzhak Rabin and his wife Leah, they had been in Washington. Rabin had been the ambassador. It was revealed that the family had a foreign currency bank account in dollars. We're talking about a bank account that was, under Israeli law at that time, illegal. How much was there was a good question, because early on it was mentioned several thousand. Later it became clear it was either $10,000 or maybe $20,000. We're not talking about millions.
Right. At the time, you couldn't have a foreign currency account.
Which is hard to believe based on Israel in 2025. But in any case, this whole idea of everyone is equal under the law and the legal system must make sure that that is enshrined and enforced, particularly for elected officials. Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin resigned over this dollar account affair. And this ultimately led in 1977 in the general election for the Labor Party, at that time led by Yitzhak Rabin, to fall from power after being the ruling party in, I would say, in Israel since 48 and in pre-state Israel since the 1930s, and a new prime minister coming to power, Menachem Begin, and the Likud, today the party led by Benjamin Netanyahu. Barak also broadened standing. He removed requirements that a petitioner must be personally injured to challenge government action. What do we mean by broadened standing? Meaning, even if someone was not personally injured by a particular act and or policy, if they felt that a particular policy or government decision was improper, immoral, or potentially illegal, they could bring that to the court. In some ways, what the court was saying was the people themselves have a role to play as supervisors, watchdogs, and overlookers on the executive branch. In some ways, what they were suggesting is going to the polls once every 4 years, that's great, but it's not enough. And democracy is preserved by the vigilance of citizens who are willing to act independently and to call those in power out when wrongdoing is suspected.
But this also led to the fact that Israel has a very strong civic society organizations, that a lot of them are focusing on law and law making. Some of you maybe have met the Iraq branch that we make sure that most of our tourists come and meet. It's Iraq, not Iraq. Iraq stands for Israel Religious Action Center, and they do holy work.
Amen.
This is the law activists of the reform movement fighting for a liberal and just society in Israel.
Iraq has been extremely effective with regards to issues around what we might call civil rights, religious pluralism, diversity in Israel, equality of representation. And so when we talk about our groups meeting and visiting with the good folks from Iraq and hearing about the work that they're doing, it's really part of the larger picture of J Squared Adventures' connection with the reform movement, and hopefully helping all of us to learn more about the crucial role that the reform movement plays in Israel.
Historically, leaders across Israel's political spectrum understood that an independent judiciary anchors democratic life are crucial.
And throughout the years, this was basically part of the central consensus of Israel's leadership around the role of the court system and the Supreme Court. So David Ben-Gurion, right, from the Labor Party, Israel's first prime minister, Ben-Gurion insisted that the rule of law must bind the government, viewing the court as the distinction between democracy and dictatorship.
Or Zev Jabotinsky, who is basically the forefather of what we call the right-wing section of Israel, the head of Beitar, envisions a court with a power to veto laws that infringed upon individual rights.
Jabotinsky had the famous phrase, "Every man a prince." And the idea in his thinking that civil rights were crucial to the basic governance of a democratic society was part of his legacy. Menachem Begin, Likewise, student of Jabotinsky, leader of the revisionist movement, head of the Likud's first prime minister, was very much a champion of the supremacy of law. He famously declared, "There are judges in Jerusalem," reminding the Israeli people and the executive branch that, hey, there has to be a discussion. There has to be a back and forth. And ultimately, there has to be a rule of law that signals absolute respect for judicial authority.
Yitzhak Rabin stressed that the court's independence was essential to Israel's moral strength and international standing.
So the court's independence and its action in rigorous review, it really helped establish Israel's standing internationally among other democratic nations, and it also oftentimes reduced external legal pressures that were brought to bear on Israel in a variety of diplomatic settings. The whole principle that is sometimes called complementarity. Under international law, bodies will only intervene in the internal affairs of a specific state when that state is unwilling or unable to carry out its own investigations. The authority and confidence that the international community had in Israel's court system as being willing and being able was very important in a whole number of different instances around diplomatic issues.
A strong, independent Supreme Court serves as a legal iron dome for Israeli soldiers and officers by demonstrating that Israel has a credible justice system capable of investigating its own military government and its own actions. The court prevents Israeli soldiers from being judged outside of Israel.
So, for example, think about Israeli officers or soldiers finishing service or in the middle of service, traveling to Portugal, England, the United States, etc., without a credible, strong sense of the international community that our court systems can deal with potential violations of human rights during warfare. Those soldiers and officers could find themselves in a situation where a foreign government arrests them and it puts them on trial because there's a sense in the international community that the Israeli justice system and Supreme Court are unable or unwilling to do the hard work.
It is our job to make sure that we investigate things that are not acceptable and that we hold ourselves to a very, very high standards.
Definitely. I mean, there the whole question of what's appropriate for the court to be involved with and what's inappropriate for the court to be involved with, that's a legitimate issue. But this is really a clear case where the court's international standing, if it is weakened or its independence is compromised, the shield for soldiers that the current justice system gives them, provides them, if it's weakened, it can become really a very dangerous landslide that can impact on soldiers and officers in a very direct way.
This debate about how much Bagatz or the Supreme Court should rule in military questions is a very big debate. As we said, we are currently facing questions about Israeli soldiers going abroad and feeling that they could protect themselves legally from what's happening, and hopefully working on strengthening our judicial system is saving us from Israeli soldiers being judged. That hasn't been brought to the test yet, but the danger is there.
No, for sure. And without a doubt, those of us who are fearful of current Israeli government attempts to shift the balance of power between the executive and the judiciary and weaken the position of the Supreme Court, part of our concern is that soldiers and officers, well-meaning citizens who are doing what they should be doing, helping to defend the country, that they run the risk of traveling abroad, wherever that might be, and not having the backing of the state of Israel to be able to protect them in a meaningful way.
And also, when you're a soldier and you see that justice has not been made and decisions that are illegal have been made, you have where to go. That is important and crucial that we educate our young people, my son, his friends, about, yes, there are rules about how we fight, and there are rules in war.
100%. And again, it goes beyond the civilian judiciary and the role of the Supreme Court. The Israeli military legal system also recognizes and sees itself as responsible to embody certain standards and ethics, both moral and legal. And hence, in Israeli military and civilian law is the notion of, yes, there are orders that you should not follow because they run the risk of breaking such basic moral and legal codes and laws that the soldier citizen is obligated, when receiving that kind of order, to say no.
The axis between the Knesset and the court is now a site of intense national debate and massive demonstration. Central questions include, has the court overreached? Should elected officials control judicial appointments? What are the limits of the court and what are the limits of the lawmakers?
So another person, another figure who's been really central in this whole debate, both as an observer, but also as an activist and himself as a central legal figure in Israel, is Justice Eliakim Rubinstein. I mean, again, this is a person who's not simply any judge. He's a man who has devoted his entire life to the service of the state of Israel. He served in numerous governments of various political colors as a diplomat, attorney general, and as a peace negotiator. He's recognized internationally as a global legal professional and scholar. And his words offer clarity and balance, hopefully, at this very polarized moment.
The dialogue between branches of government is vital, and so is the media debate. This is what he's saying. Criticism of the court is legitimate. It is an integral part of democratic discourse and the democratic discussion. The dialogue between branches of government is vital, and so is media debate. The problem lies elsewhere. It lies with the effort of delegitimizing the court by certain circles, by portraying the court as a power-hungry group of people. The confidence of various segments of Israeli society is being eroded. Its existence is vital for the state and its citizens, for human rights and for civil rights. I am proud to be part of it.
So Rubinstein's comment, I think, is really crucial, partially because of the pride that he takes in our system, and he should take in his role in solidifying and defending this system all throughout the years. But I think he's saying something about the public discussion and the idea that this is discussion which takes place, yes, between branches of government. That's obvious. It's partially about power. It's partially about who decides. It's partially about understandings of democracy, but he also mentions the media debate and the question of, again, how are citizens involved? And we've mentioned this issue previously in this episode. The media debate is one of the ways that citizens are involved. Different opinions, different takes, different interpretations being played out in the public sphere. The media are kind of midura, as we say, our campfire of the community, and whichever particular media you might turn into, being informed, being involved, and also voicing your own opinion, whether that's writing a letter, whether that's calling up a radio show, or whether that's attending a demonstration on one side or another of the political map. As we wrap up, we return to the four images that define this building: the square of law, the circle of justice, the light of transparency, and the stone of memory. We find our ultimate mandate in the foundational words of the Scroll of Independence, Megillat Atzmaut, which decrees that the State of Israel
will be based on freedom, justice, and peace, as envisioned by the prophets of Israel. It will ensure complete equality of social and political rights to all its inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, or sex.
Ultimately, what kind of justice do we want practiced in this building, and what kind of society must we shape in order to sustain it? And now, something for the road. A tip, a recommendation to help you make every journey your own.
Hi, everyone. I'm Doron Wilfand. I've been a tour educator for about 26 years, and I love working with J Squared Adventures. I'm also married +4. Been through a rough time in the last 2+ years, but now starting to recover with the rest of Israel and especially the tourism industry. I want to share with you today a little bit about what I think is one of the most important institutions in Israel. It's called the IDI, the Israel Democracy Institute. And it's actually, they call themselves, and I love that, a think do tank. And what they try to do is they try to take two elements. One is very, very thorough research by some of the leading scholars, especially when it has to do with political science in Israel and Israeli history. And the other is also all kinds of very specific recommendations of how to strengthen and stabilize Israeli democracy. So I'll try to explain. In the early 1990s, when actually Israel was reshaping its basis for being a Jewish democratic state by really enforcing building blocks of what at that time we hoped would be a constitution. Until today, we're still waiting for that. A few people, one of them very, very close to Menachem Begin actually, formed the institute. And the idea was, since Israel is a very vibrant democracy on the one hand, but also a very young and sometimes suffers some instability because of its very unique system, the idea was to help enforce and also maybe strengthen the bonds that help keep different parts of Israeli society together. And the way they've been doing it is threefold, I think. The first, very detailed surveys and studies, kind of taking the pulse. You know, it would be like when you go to your doctor for your annual physical. So they do it for the state of Israel. They do it according to what the Israeli public feels and thinks, and also about the performance of different Israeli institutions, the government, the Supreme Court, executive, the judicial, the constitutional aspects of Israeli politics. So they do these studies, but they don't only make the studies and the surveys. What they also do is they make very specific recommendations, sometimes even trying to draft bills or proposals to fix things that need to be fixed and to maybe do kind of a do-over to some things that are not functioning as well anymore. And actually, originally, this institute was, I wouldn't call it conservative, but it was kind of maybe even a little bit right of center. The people who established it were people who were close to Menachem Begin, as I told you before. And the interesting thing is that today, it is very, very controversial. If in the past it seemed like a very mainstream institute, which I would say most Israelis, well, Israelis in the know, probably didn't have a strong opinion about and saw it as kind of a positive, nice resource. Today it's very controversial because the institute, like most of the Israeli or what used to be Israeli mainstream or Israeli center, has positioned itself as a very strong defender, especially of the judicial system in Israel, and is kind of very, very critical about most aspects of the so-called legal reform. It has become kind of categorized as part of the left or a radical anti-Zionist or anti-national Israeli. So I think that's one thing to note. One thing that I think is important is that it's a great resource for people who love Israel, who are interested in Israel, and people who like to read, but also may not have the patience to read hundreds of pages. So if you go into their website, you will have very different things. You will have some very, very detailed surveys and reports that could be over 100 pages. And you would have very short, concise summaries on positions of very, very current events, very acute things, but also on long-term plans and great summaries for each year. And the summaries are not only things that directly have to do with the Israeli political system, but also with issues of church and state, also of issues that have to do with the Arab minority in Israel and its place in Israeli society, and also issues of social justice and different approaches to resolving crises in things as diverse as, let's say, the hiring crime rates in Arab society, the draft issues of the ultra-Orthodox, and young couples struggling to buy apartments in Israel. So we are talking about the Israel Democracy Institute, and I strongly recommend to Google their name and just make sure that you get to the English website, because it may first refer you to the Hebrew. So if you Google their name in English, the Israel Democracy Institute, you can find the website, which is excellent. So I think, again, I strongly recommend knowing this institute. If you have a time to, if you have a longer visit to Israel, maybe even schedule a visit, but more than anything else, using the website to stay updated on some very, very important issues. And before we part, I would just like to say that I'm super excited on seeing you either in Israel or in Poland or maybe in Greece on an upcoming J-Squared adventure.
Thanks for listening. Dive deeper into the world of travel on our J-Squared Adventures website. That's jsquaredadventures.com. And stay in the loop with our latest adventures on all our social media platforms: Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, all under J2 Adventures.
And if you enjoyed hanging out with us, don't forget to leave us a comment, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Until next time, travel safely and keep wondering. I'm Rivka.
I'm Scott. See you soon at J Squared Adventures, Wandering Jews.